Good morning. Welcome to today's discussion. My name is William Wexler. I lead the Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for attending this event today. Thank you very much also and especially for our distinguished speakers, His Excellency Shaikh Khalid bin Ahmed bin Mohammed Al Khalifa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain, and Mr. Brian Hook, U.S. Special Representative for Iran and Senior Policy Advisor to the Secretary of State. And of course, today's moderator, Fred Kempe, our CEO at the Atlantic Council and President. This panel demonstrates the core belief of the Atlantic Council that the challenges that we face in the world are best met by the United States working with its partners and allies. The issues that we plan to address today, the recent escalatory pattern in the Gulf with Iran, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and others, these are some of the biggest challenges in the Middle East. The United States can and does provide, of course, leadership on a number of these issues, but we are vastly more effective when we are working with and in partnership with our friends and allies, especially like Bahrain. It's through this kind of conversation that we can develop, how we are doing that, where we can further improve our work together, and how we can achieve our best outcomes for the United States, for Bahrain, and for the region. Briefly before we begin, I want to introduce our two guests. Shaikh Khalid, of course, Foreign Minister, has held that position since 2005. His career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs extends all the way back to 1985. Since that time, he's served as an advisor to previous ministers and to the Crown Prince. He's held ambassadorships in Sweden, Norway, Ireland, the Netherlands, and the Court of St. James, amongst numerous other accomplishments. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for being with us today. I'm delighted as well, and as always, to welcome Brian Hook back to the Atlantic Council. I think you may have the record of being the most visited member of the Trump administration to the Atlantic Council events, and for which we greatly appreciate it. Brian, of course, is responsible for coordinating the State Department's and the government's wide Iran-related activity. Prior to taking on this role in 2018, he served as Director of Policy Planning Staff. He's also held numerous senior positions in the Bush administration, including Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations. Before I turn it over to the moderator, I want to remind everyone that this conversation is on the record. With that, I'll turn it over to our CEO and President, Fred Kempe. Thank you very much.
I think we're actually going to get started with some opening statements and comments from the two speakers. So Shaikh Khalid, maybe we'll let you go first, and then Brian Hook, and then I will lob a battery of questions your way, and then we'll have some time to go to the audience. We have a terrific group of experts, a lot of people with a lot of knowledge as I look around the room, so I think this will be a really interesting discussion. So, Your Excellency, I pass to you to start.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Wexler, Director of Middle East Program and Director of the Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East at the Atlantic Council. And I thank the Atlantic Council, and I thank you, Mr. Kempe, for presiding over this important meeting with such an important audience that we try to clarify and articulate our positions regarding the various challenges we face in our region. I've met with you, Brian, many times. We've worked together. We have exchanged ideas, and we found that we do agree, not only between us, but among all our friends, that the challenges are serious. The challenges need to be addressed and need to be addressed soon. And otherwise, it's not wise to leave matters as they are. I will be talking about, if you allow me, 3 points. One will be the Peace to Prosperity workshop regarding the region and specifically the Israel-Palestine conflict. Then after that, I'll be talking about Iran and the challenges we face in our relationship with Iran. And then, of course, I will come to touch upon regional cooperation that would prevent things from going bad in the problems we have. The Peace to Prosperity, we had a workshop. We had a very important workshop happening in Bahrain, with the participation from the region, of course, from the United States, represented by Secretary Mnuchin and Mr. Jared Kushner, Mr. Jason Greenblatt, and all the important figures in the business world. They were there in Bahrain, and also from the region, mainly from Saudi Arabia. 2 ministers were there, and from the United Arab Emirates and other countries in the region that came to help. We did not succeed in convincing the Palestinian Authority to come and participate, but we are not seeing it as the end of the world, because the more we succeed in this field, in the economic field, the more it will be convincing for them to come and benefit from it. It's not the first time that an economic approach was taken to help them. We all remember that in 2008, former Prime Minister Salam Fayyad did try an effort of that in that field to help the Palestinians economically. Secretary John Kerry in 2014 or something, or 13, also tried and brought investors to come and help the Palestinians. That will also was accepted and embraced by the Palestinian Authority. So we really wanted them to try this one, among other efforts coming from Asia, from Japan, and from everywhere. But they chose not to come, and the reason was that this is part of what is we hear every day as a deal of a century. A deal is a deal that's being struck between two sides, and we don't see a deal that's being struck. We has always seen plans from the United States of America to come and help the region, from William Rogers until today. The United States of America has always been a force for good, trying to reach a peace agreement in the Middle East. But this is now an economic effort that we will want to see it succeed, and we will want to see it see the Palestinians benefit from it. And that doesn't mean we will change our position regarding the solution. The solution is, as we see it, as a two-state solution. This solution is shared not only in the Arab world or around the world, but also within the Israeli public. Parties in Israel do accept that the two-state solution is the way forward, but eventually it's what will the Palestinians and the Israelis agree on that we will support, that we will stand with. Whatever they will reach, we will not go and tell the Palestinians do this or do that, or try to be prophets of the matter and tell the Israelis exactly what to do. We leave it between them, but we do make them hear our views on the matter. That's why during the P2P, the workshop, there was participation, and we accepted the participation of Israeli media. They came, they conducted interviews, they went around town, they felt comfortable in a country. They saw that the scope of where the Israeli people belong is much bigger than the two peace agreements they have with the two countries, which is very important. And those are the beginnings of moving towards peace with the late President Anwar Sadat. And they saw that the scope is much bigger and the potential is greater. So we did pass the message to them, and we do believe, and we've always aimed to do proper communication that would reach the people through their own channels. And that's what happened when I sat with Channel 13, and also with the Times of Israel. And that kind of had a welcome, feelings from and statements in many places around the world. And we will continue to do that, because that's the way forward. That's when the late President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, he's a man who fought for his country, and he's a man who made peace for his country. So, and when he visited Israel, one of the media persons in Israel asked him, "What are you doing here, Mr. President?" He said, "I'm here to talk to the Israeli soldier to come down from his tank and listen to me, and I want to listen to him." That was a very important time, and we should build on that, and we should not forget that these are the foundations for real peace. We're not doing anything for PR. We're doing it for national interest of our region and our countries. So this is where we are, and we don't want to let this issue to continue and to be used by countries or terror groups or countries that seek dominance in the region, and that would bring us to the issue of Iran. If it wasn't for Iran being present, Iranian soldiers, Iranian money, Iranian support for Hamas and jihadis and that take control of Gaza, we would have been much closer to achieving a better peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we would have had a better chance. But that role was so toxic that it would make things very difficult every time. So talking about Iran, although I hate to, when I come to talk about this subject, I hate to use the word Iran. Iran is the name of a country. Iran is the name of a nation. Iran is a country that we have them across the water from us, and we have, Persian community in Bahrain as part of our citizens. So actually, Iran, we did have problems with it in the past, but we also did have good days as a neighbor towards the last 10 years of the late Shah of Iran. So I would say the challenge is the Islamic Republic rather than saying it's Iran. So we always aimed for a better relationship. It used to be claimed as a 14th province by the late Shah of Iran, and then with our friends and allies in the world and the region, he was convinced and he accepted wholeheartedly that he will seek a way out of this issue when he accepted the UN mission to ascertain the views of the people of Bahrain. So after that, he accepted the report, he accepted the Security Council announcement, and he recognized Bahrain as an independent country. And he turned from a threat to an ally, a friend of Bahrain. So then he sent his foreign minister, then who is still alive, Ardeshir Zahidi, who came to Bahrain with a big expo, showing us machinery, food stuff, cars, buses, everything that Iran used to produce. And there was a good new dawn for us with Iran. That did not last for more than 10 years when he was ousted, and then the Ayatollahs came. They had a revolution, and we respect the revolution of the Iranian people. That's their own matter. But the Ayatollahs took over and took control of the whole matters there in Iran. And here we go back again with them to talking about the 14th province. And this is something that we were not able to accept since then. And of course, the IRGC has plotted since in 81, in the 90s, have always plotted to overthrow, apprehended in Kuwait, everywhere. They will not have any respect to any friend, and they will definitely not allow whoever opposes them to have a peace of mind. So we appreciate the role of the United States. The United States has always been with us, trying to stop this malign activities of Iran, and that has intensified positively later with the policy of the US administration today by taking a tough stance regarding Iran and the malign policy they follow. When it comes to the JCPOA, yes, we did welcome it in the past, but we saw it as a step towards achieving something. We didn't see it as a big achievement because it did not put a time limit. It has a time limit. It doesn't prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power with nuclear weapons. It doesn't touch their weaponization program of their missiles, and it doesn't deal with their terror activities in the region. So if there would be a deal, everybody will want a better deal. We all agree that a better deal is a good choice, but it should be a deal that will prevent them from having the ability to threaten the region, and that will put them on the right track towards having better relationship. It's in their hand. They did take important decisions in the past. We all remember the Ayatollah Khomeini when he decided to take a sip from that chalice of poison and stop the Iran-Iraq war. Well, that sip kept him alive and kept his regime alive. It didn't kill him. So maybe another sip of that matter to change their policy and have us move forward in that regard. In Yemen, which is also falls under the issue of Iran. The first time I met a Houthi person was in Riyadh, when the opposition was talking to the government of Ali Abdullah Saleh. And we were there in the GCC Secretariat, and we talked to Basandoua, and we talked to Abu Bakr al-Ghurbi was there, and the Houthi was there. He joined in the conversation, and the second time I saw a Houthi was also in Riyadh, in the palace of King Abdullah, when the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, abdicated, and he was there to celebrate that with us. What happened months later is that it's a clear coup d'etat when they repudiated from their agreements, exactly the same as when they dealt with their own revolution in their own country against a dictator, exactly going along the book of what the Ayatollahs did when they took control and put everybody aside in Iran, took control of the country since then until today. So we do want them to be part of a solution, the Houthis themselves, and we do want to see stability coming back to the country. And we always face this question as how long this war will go on? Well, the real question is how long will Iran be there? Because it's a vital interest for us that the forces of the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, the Hezbollahs, and the others should be out of Yemen and should be out of the countries of the region and stay within their own boundaries and mind their own business. This is what we want. That will be the real solution to this matter. We all know the role in Syria and Iraq. I will leave that to the question time. I don't want to take much more time. But I think I should stress on one important point, that how we move forward, we should act as like-minded nations, as friends and allies that will work toward security and stability in the region. And we do work together, and we should build the core of that. The United States submitted the idea of MESA, the Middle East Strategic Alliance. It's a very wonderful idea. We need to build on MESA. We need to get everybody involved. And we need to have the engagement that would bring the GCC, the like-minded nations, the region, coming together and facing the threat. And that would go beyond the issue of the Islamic Republic and beyond even the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But as we work together, we need to make sure that no country should seek to get closer to Iran or to the Islamic Republic. And here I'm talking about Qatar mainly, that they have built a very close relationship with Iran. The time we work together to make it difficult for Iran to conduct its policy, we see open relationship from their side. So they should not seek relations. They had a very successful visit here in the United States last week, but that should not happen while they are harming their allies and friends in the region that stand with the United States, and they should be working along the same line. So they need to work with the region, not against it. I think collective work is the solution together. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaikh Khalid, and I'll come back with some questions on your excellent opening comments in a minute. Let me turn to Brian first.
Thank you, Fred, and I want to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this. It's always good to be in any part of the world with Shaikh Khalid. He speaks very eloquently about the challenges and the opportunities in the region. I also want to recognize Sheikh Abdullah, who represents Bahrain with distinction here in our nation's capital. He's a great friend to the United States and always enjoy working with him. We, over the last few months, we've had the chance to work very closely with Bahrain, both in Europe and in the Middle East. Shaikh Khalid was in Warsaw when we had a global ministerial to talk about a future of peace and stability in the Middle East. We had 65 nations from every continent except Antarctica. And in that setting, we were able to cover a lot of issues, including Iran. We covered Syria. We talked about Yemen. We had Yemen's foreign minister there. Very good and ambitious agenda. 65 countries, not one country defended Iran's foreign policy. And I will stipulate that we don't always agree on the means, and we sometimes have differences on tactics to achieve our goals. But there is no one who wants Iran to become a nuclear weapon state. And there is nobody out there defending Iran's expansionist and violent foreign policy. And when we were in Warsaw, Shaikh Khalid had a chance to, and other countries, we had MBZ there. I'm sorry,
ABZ.
ABZ was there,
Yeah.
and we had a number of good foreign ministers. We had Prime Minister Netanyahu, and these were countries that were on the front lines, and we thought it was very important for European nations especially to hear. And one of the things that came out, we were at dinner, and we had a discussion among Arab foreign ministers and the Prime Minister of Israel. And at the close of it, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, when Arabs and Israelis agree so strongly on something, you've got to pay attention. Something is different, something is changing. And when I get around the region, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, met with all the Gulf states, then was in London and Paris for talks with our European allies. The Middle East is changing. And the Arabs and I would say this about Iran's foreign policy. I'll say one nice thing about Iran's foreign policy. It has brought Arabs and Israelis together in ways that we didn't thought possible, because they're facing a common enemy. And Iran, from 2007 to about 2017, that's a decade, was able to run an expansionist foreign policy without anyone saying no. We have taken a different approach. And we have, with the defeat of ISIS, believe that the major driver of instability in today's Middle East is Iran's foreign policy. And Shaikh Khalid talked about they have a hard time staying within their own borders, and that's part of their constitution. It is a revolutionary model, and you essentially have a conventional government that has a layer that sits on top of it. It's clerical and revolutionary oversight. And they want to export that model around the Middle East. They want to remake the Middle East in their image. And since 1981, you've had, as Shaikh Khalid mentioned, Iran thinks of Bahrain as a province of Iran. And there was one in 2017, there was a senior IRGC commander who said that Bahrain should be the base of revolution. When we hear the sort of, it's almost a cliche, it's become boilerplate, where we talk about Iran's malign activity and its destabilizing activities. This is what we're talking about. At the heart of it is an Islamic Republic that wants to redesign the Middle East along sectarian lines to create a Shia corridor of power that stretches from Lebanon all the way down to Yemen. This is a driver of instability, and Iran is incredibly good at it because they have almost perfected the art of warfare in the gray zone. We, starting in about August or September, White House president issued a statement that said, we will no longer make a distinction between the Islamic Republic and the proxies that it organizes, trains, and equips. Iran has thrived on deniable attacks. We see it almost every day with the Houthis shooting rockets and missiles into the Iranian rockets and missiles. I've seen them into Saudi Arabia, into the international airport in Riyadh, into King Abha Airport, around the region. So we are trying to highlight, expose Iran's ambitions, to explain to the world how they go about this. And our foreign policy in the Middle East is designed to reverse the balance of power in favor of our friends, and that includes Bahrain. If you look at President Trump's speech in Riyadh, his first trip overseas as president, he laid out a vision for the Middle East, focused on extremism, but also improving the competencies and the capabilities of our regional partners so that they can be better equipped to defend themselves against Iran's aggression. Iran's security concerns are largely self-generated. And so when Iran talks about they need the largest missile inventory in the Middle East to defend itself. I don't know how the world's leading sponsor of terrorism is entitled to a claim of self-defense. we do not see Saudi rockets going into Iran, but we see Iranian rockets and missiles going into Saudi Arabia. And I can replicate this around the Middle East. And so we are trying to drive up the costs of Iran's foreign policy, to make it prohibitively expensive, to strengthen our partners in the region so that they can defend themselves. And whether that's Israel or Bahrain or Saudi or UAE, Egypt, Jordan, whoever it is, we are trying to strengthen our partners. And we have made a lot of progress over the last 2 years toward that goal. We're very pleased with the progress we've made to reverse Iranian hegemonic ambitions, to make it much harder for them. They have to feel like there's a contest. And there was a very long decade where they didn't feel like there was a contest. And when we came into office, and I remember on that trip with the president to Riyadh, there was a great sense of relief that the United States was recognizing this in a really fundamental way. And I heard nothing but sort of appreciation for this new policy. And on my last trip to the Gulf, similar, there's obviously a lot of anxiety because Iran doesn't like being told no. So they are engaging in attacks directly on the water in the Gulf, right outside of Bahrain, but they're also doing it through their proxies. And so it's very hard to eliminate the asymmetric advantage of modern terrorism. And Iran is very good at that. But we have weakened Iran. By almost every metric, they are weaker today than when we took office 2 years ago. And so are their proxies. Again, that does not mean that we have eliminated the asymmetric advantage, but they are weaker. And if you don't believe me, you could take the word of the New York Times and the Washington Post, who in the last few months have run front page, top of the fold stories documenting how Iran's proxies are weaker today because of our approach of economic pressure and diplomatic isolation, and also partly thanks to Iran. It is a kleptocracy. It robs its own people blind in order to fund its expansionist foreign policy. We know the Iranian people are tired of how many billions of dollars have been spent in Syria supporting Assad. They would like to see that money spent in Iran, not exported. And so when we look at the things that we are asking for, many of these line up with what the Iranian people would like.
So thank you for that, Brian.
May I add one little thing?
Please.
I forgot to mention that with all the discoveries of weapons and explosives that we found in Bahrain, it was with the help of our allies, the United States. They would watch that boat come from the Iranian coast and drop these stashes or in the waters, and they will know the coordinates and they'll let us know, and we will come and wait and watch who will come to pick it up from Bahrain. And we'll find all those explosives, and then what we found inside Bahrain, some of it is being displayed here in the Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. And thank you for organizing that display, Brian. And this is very important. It tells you what exactly they're doing, and that's only a sampler of what we have faced and found, and what led to deaths and injuries in our police force. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Shaikh Khalid and Brian, thank you for opening the discussion. Sheikh Abdullah, it's also an honor for us to work with you. So we've been following the situation in the Gulf and with Iran closely. And I think we can now drill down a little bit and look at some of the concrete issues off of that. At the Atlantic Council, with our Rafi Curry Center for the Middle East and our Middle East Security Initiative at the Scowcroft Center, we take a look at the two major pieces, which is how do you wind down conflict, manage conflict, and how do you unlock human potential. And to a certain extent, the two things we're talking today are two sides of that coin, which is the Iran question. I'm going to ask some questions about that, and the Peace for Prosperity workshop, and then what comes after that. And Sheikh Khalid, I'm going to start with you because of some of the intriguing things you said in your opening comments regarding Israel. You did do the interviews you talked about with, among others, the Israeli journalist Barak Ravid, and it was a rare moment. And one of your quotes was, Israel is a country in the Middle East. Israel is a part of this heritage of the whole region, this whole region historically. So the Jewish people have a place amongst us. So communication needs to be a prerequisite for solving all the dispute. We should talk. That's a pretty bold statement. And I wonder, you don't go so far in this statement to call for normalization, but what can happen between Israel and Bahrain short of that, or could even that happen? Commercial ties, tourism, water areas of mutual interest, where could you build concretely on these promising beginnings? And as Brian said, it's a new picture in the Middle East. As he said, one of the nice outcomes of the Iranian expansionist policy. Do you agree with that? And if so, where do you take it in a concrete manner?
When we say that Israel is part of the Middle East, it's a country in the Middle East, yes, we all know that. I didn't say anything new. Maybe people did not say it very often, but who did we give the Arab Peace Initiative to? To Israel, which is there in the Middle East, and we offered land for peace. We offered the two-state solution side by side with all the support of the Arab League. Then it was adopted by an Arab summit. It was for Israel. So I mentioned a country that we have given an offer to, and it's amongst us in the region. But we need to have a better relationship with. One day we need to have something that would open up the potential of the peoples of the Middle East together. And when I mentioned the Jewish heritage in the Middle East, where did Judaism was born? In the Middle East. So they belong to that Middle East, and its heritage even older than many other heritages in the region. So we need they populated cities in the Middle East. We've worked together. We spoke at many instances the same language, in cities like Baghdad, and cities in Morocco, in Cairo, and in the Levant. They're there. So why should we ignore that? This is a fact. So we said it, but I'm kind of surprised that people saw it very important while it is given. So we will continue along the same line, but what's in the future? We need to continue our effort to reach out to the Israeli people. The Israeli people do, in their own nature, like any other human beings, they do want to see a peace of mind in their lives and for the future generations. So they need to hear us, and they need to hear the truth. As we say, dogri, straightforward. This is what we believe in, and these are the principles that we want to achieve, and we were so close in the past in achieving it. I'm not blaming one side or the other, but they need to hear us that the area of where they belong is much bigger. It encompasses our lands, our countries, and we have a heritage in our country for the Jewish people. So this is something that will not make us, kind of veer away from the principles of solving the dispute. And these are very important principles, as that as much as the Israelis have the right to their own country, the Palestinians have the right to their own country, on their own land. They've been there for millennia. And there is no way that we ignore their right to be belonging to that land. So a solution is what we seek that will not allow anybody to be taken out of the picture or thrown in the sea or anything done of that nature. That's what we'll aim. So we should continue communicating and communicating and communicating until the hearts and minds are open.
But more concrete steps of the sort that I was outlining, tourism, commercial, water. Do you see that, or is it too early to be talking about?
Well, it's too early to say it now, but it's not that we don't want to get there. We want to get there, and we aim to get there. But you aim to get there not in a way that would really serve the interests and make the people comfortable doing it. And it's not about just having a show or a PR. Yeah. We can say it, but we may not be able to deliver soon. Yeah. But we do want to have that happen soon.
Yeah, please.
I think unity of effort in one domain can enable progress in others. what we're seeing is, as I said earlier, we are there. Those countries in the region are on the front lines of Iranian aggression, and they are feeling the insecurity. They are victims of Iranian aggression, and they see Israel defending itself very strongly, and in many ways, a lot of what they're doing to push back on Iran can contribute to greater peace in the region. When we were in Bahrain, we had 30 countries, about 300 people were there. We released there were 140 projects that were announced. That plan is available on the White House website. It has already been downloaded over 1 million times. And we presented a vision there of prosperity and dignity for the Palestinian people. And it's important, I think, to have something hopeful. Historically, I think that vision has been obscured by political plans that have been able to succeed. And we think that by having the discussion we did in Bahrain, we had the head of the World Bank, we had IMF, we had the president of FIFA talking about sports in the territories, we had business leaders, we talked about the rule of law, the sanctity of contract. We had Steve Schwartzman there who was talking about the kinds of things that business leaders need to see to feel that they can then invest safely. The consensus from that workshop in Bahrain is that the plan that we put forward is very realistic, and it is the right thing. It is the sort of right vision. These are all and the World Bank and the IMF, Tony Blair was there. There's a great deal of support for that. All of that is possible, but we're going to need to have leadership that wants that vision more than they hate Israel. And it's important that we get there, but we think the Palestinian people are hungry for this sort of vision. And the fact that it has been downloaded so many times, I think, shows that there's a lot of interest in what we're doing there. It is not what we're seeing in terms of the cooperation on the threats. I would not describe that as normalization, but it's becoming the new normal. As we see it's just a lot easier for people to have these discussions, to come together and say, well, tell me what you're experiencing. What sort of threats are you experiencing? And it's interesting, if you look at, when you get everybody in a room, everybody has sort of a different understanding, whether it's people in Lebanon who Hezbollah is not there to promote security, sovereignty, and prosperity for the Lebanese people. It's there you've got two militaries and two governments in one state. And Iraq would like to do that in Yemen. And I'm sorry, Iran would like to do that in Yemen, and they would also like to do it in Iraq. And they're trying to lay deep roots in Syria as a forward deployed missile base to attack Israel. Again, Iran's security concerns are largely self-generated. And if they would pull back to their own borders, they would find that their neighbors would be very grateful for that.
So I'm going to come back to Iran in a minute. Shaikh Khalid, let me follow up on the Peace and Prosperity Workshop. You said the fact that the Palestinian Authority wasn't there, we aren't seeing it as the end of the world. But what is the next step? So Brian talked about the download from the site, et cetera, but first of all, interesting that Bahrain decided to take leadership on this. So it'd be interesting for me to understand why your country decided to do that. But what do you do now so that some of this $50 billion becomes real? How do you actually get your Palestinian friends who were not there to be part of this?
We decided to host the Peace to Prosperity workshop because we have discussed it with our allies, the United States here, and the United States thought that the U.S. administration that it could be helpful if it happens in the region, and we discussed it and we went over all the details about the economic plan to be presented and the workshop and the parameters of that workshop for the help of the Palestinians. We saw that this is something that we should not refuse, we should not oppose, and it should happen, and there was no reason not to host it in Bahrain if there was a request. We didn't ask for it, but when it comes, it's something that we appreciate, that we can do it, and we should send the right message for everyone to host something like that. We saw it as something that would, with all the participation there, especially with the heavy role of the United States government in it, that it would be helpful for the Palestinian people to come and benefit from it. The Palestinian people have some of the most brilliant economists in the world and business people, and they can, if they came there, they would have found out what is good for them and what is that they don't want. And they could have expressed their view to make it even better. Where do we go next? I think we're still assessing. The United States is still assessing the outcome of the workshop, and what is the next step being to have it here, to have it in another place in the region. That would be something that we should not lose momentum. It's a good thing that we don't, it's not a one-off matter, and it should be built on, and it should have a process soon, and we agree on that matter.
And Brian, the political plan, which everyone expects now to follow, when does that come? Can you tell us anything about what it would look like?
It'll be a decision. The timing of it will be decided by the president and Jared and Jason. And so it's something that we've been working on for quite some time. We decided to roll this out, starting with the economic piece first. And that was, I mean, I think if anybody goes and takes a look at this, you will see the seriousness of purpose that we have put into the economic vision. And the political piece has also been deep consultation with all the stakeholders, and we look forward to releasing it.
Might something come as early as this summer, for example?
I will not predict the timing.
One other thing, I've heard wind about something else, and I wonder if you can comment, both of you can comment on this, first Brian and Shaikh Khalid. I've heard that there may be something building off of Warsaw, building off the 65 countries in the maritime realm. Could you address whether there's anything to that?
Yeah, in Warsaw, we had the global ministerial there, and that was also, Jared Kushner attended, and that was his first public setting with ministers to start talking about the work that we've been doing. And we had Secretary Pompeo there, Vice President Pence, terrific gathering. The conclusion that we took from Warsaw is they didn't want it to stop. So we heard it from both Israel and Arab nations that we wanted this to continue. So we have created what is called the Warsaw Process. And we essentially took inventory of the priorities that leaders have identified. We have created working groups around it at the expert level, the assistant secretary level. And so Bahrain has graciously agreed to host a workshop, a follow-on meeting on maritime security. And you will have all 65 nations who attended in Warsaw. They will be invited to Bahrain. And it's a chance, this is very timely, obviously, with what's going on in the region. When we were in Warsaw, it was before Iran decided to start conducting maritime attacks, threatening freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and in the Gulf of Oman. And so in the coming months, Bahrain will be hosting one of the many working group of sort of assistant secretary level officials to work on maritime security. And Bahrain is right there on the front lines of it.
Toward a summit on maritime security of these same countries, or?
Well, yes, it would be all the same countries in Bahrain to focus on maritime security. And we will also have one on cyber, hosted by another country. We'll have one on
counterterrorism,
terror finance,
humanitarian
relief.
If I'm not mistaken, so I had 25 years at the Wall Street Journal. I'm a recovering journalist. I think you may have just committed news, but in any case, Shaikh Khalid, can you comment on this?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We were in Warsaw. We participated in Warsaw among the 69 nations, and we believe that the Warsaw Global Conference created momentum, a new momentum, and also showed clarity in our views regarding many matters in the region, especially when we came to talk about the threat from the Islamic Republic. So we didn't want to lose both. We didn't want to lose the clarity or blur it, and we didn't want to lose the momentum. So the idea of having subgroupings of the Warsaw process, and even having another ministerial after some of the meetings, I think it should continue. We should not lose it, and we should stay the course. And we were kind of the idea that we were offered the idea of hosting a maritime and aviation security group, and this is fitting because Bahrain, for the maritime, it's home of the Combined Maritime Force International, led by the U.S. Fifth Fleet. And this is a place, and our region also is a region that we should really look at for when it comes to aviation security. And this is something that will also be part of an effort of bringing the countries together to a common understanding.
And A, timing, B, have you shared this with the other partners? How far underway are we on
I
this?
think we've started now working. We're thinking of sometimes in the fall, this fall, maybe October or November. And we just wrote the letter, and then we need to work on the invitations. But we've accepted, and it will happen.
And I'm meeting later this afternoon with the Polish foreign minister.
Good.
To be talking about the Warsaw process and all the follow-on work that we're going to be doing. But this was very successful. It was really good cooperation in the U.S. and Poland, but then also with Bahrain.
Thank you. So to Iran, let's do a little bit of a threat assessment, a situation analysis. Shaikh Khalid, there's wide reporting that we had a near miss in a potential military action on Iran. Were you pleased with President Trump's decision not to strike Iran? How do you assess the Iranian threat at the moment? Is it reduced because of the maximum pressure campaign? Is it higher? Are you preparing for a potential conflict?
We're always on our toes, preparing to defend ourselves against any threat, including the threat coming from the Islamic Republic. But when it comes to assessing, I think there's no difference between Iran's posture now, today, yesterday, or the day before. They've been continuing on the same path of trying to take control of this whole region, and we're standing and we are ready to face that threat from the Islamic Republic. Talking about the decision by the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, to not to respond to Iranian provocation, I think Iran, with its provocations, they want to pull the United States into a conflict according to their own terms, and then call for what they want in this matter. I think that was wise from the President of the United States not to get into the matter the Iranian way or the way the Iran wants it, but to keep the higher ground and keep the pressure. Iran wanted to, provoke the United States into an attack on them, and then bring the whole world to trying to then relieve the pressure that the world is putting on them. And this is something that I think the United States has seen it clearly, and we see it as not responding to provocations is always a wise thing to do, and do it on your own terms.
And Brian, from your standpoint, if you can sort of assess the maximum pressure campaign, particularly the sanctions at this point, one would assume, and as you said, there's reporting newspapers that Iran has less capability to undertake malign activity through proxies or itself. Can you quantify that? Are they less dangerous because of the maximum pressure campaign? The last couple of weeks would have said they may be a little bit more dangerous over the short term. How are you looking at where you are, and then what's your end game? What is you hope to get to through this?
When we came into office, we obviously inherited ISIS and North Korea testing ICBMs and expanding its nuclear program, and so that was the sort of the first order. But then very quickly we started focusing on Iran. And we put in place a strategy to deny Iran of its imperial ambitions. And that has many different lines of effort. It has a diplomatic effort, it has a deterrence effort, and it also has a dimension of standing with the Iranian people, who we know are the longest suffering victims of the Iranian regime. And we were in the deal for a period. The president did make an effort over 6 months to try to fix the deficiencies. It has a weak inspections regime. There's no mention of ICBMs, and it expires. The Iran deal has not addressed Iran's nuclear program. It expires.
It expires.
In 17 months, the arms embargo on the world's leading sponsor of terrorism expires, the UN arms embargo. It expires in 17 months because of this deal. The travel ban on Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, it expires in 17 months. You are going to see a systematic unraveling of the Iran nuclear deal. We have pulled forward the expiration date because we want to deal with Iran now and not deal with an Iran that would be much stronger in out years. And our foreign policy, we are very pleased with the progress that we've had. I'll give you just a couple of data points to answer Fred's question. When the United States was in the Iran deal under the prior administration, Iran's military spending reached record levels. It went up each successive year it went up. It achieved a record level of $14 billion. When we came into office, and even while we were in the deal, we put in place new sanctions very quickly. The cumulative effect of our sanctions has not only weakened their proxies, but the first year we were in office, Iran's military budget then went down 10%. And then in March, they released their newest budget, and their military spending is down 28%. 28% cut. So that is a tale of two regimes, from record highs to a 28% cut in their military spending. When Iran has less money to spend on its military and its proxies, it improves the stability of the region. As Cicero said, money is the sinews of war. Iran has less money today. I'll give you an example on oil. Iran's largest source of export revenue is oil. And when we left the deal, Iran was exporting 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. That is permitted under the Iran nuclear deal. When we got out of the deal, we ended all oil waivers. You may have seen press reports from industry analysts that have Iran's oil now at below 300,000 barrels of oil. That is about 10% of what they were exporting until very recently. And we have also put sanctions on Iran's petrochemical sector, their second largest source of export revenue, and industrial metals and precious metals. And we have put in place sanctions on over almost 1,000 individuals and entities. We have blacklisted 70 Iranian corrupt banks that engage in money laundering and terror finance. Our unilateral sanctions have been much more effective than the multilateral sanctions that were in place in both the Bush and Obama administration. And this is what is necessary to do. It is necessary that we do this. Iran, I think, became very accustomed to, as I said, being able to, people have largely over the many decades with this Islamic Republic, they've decided to accept a certain level of violence. They are willing to cede that to Iran, that they engage on a very regular basis on a certain level of violence. Our position is that there is no acceptable level of lethal assistance to Hezbollah. There is no acceptable level of funding to terrorist organizations. That has to stop. We also want to restore the standard that was supported unanimously by the UN Security Council, that the world's leading sponsor of terrorism does not need to be enriching uranium, and it should not enrich uranium. If you look around the world today at countries that have peaceful nuclear power, over half of them don't enrich. You do not need to enrich uranium to have peaceful nuclear power. And because we're talking about Iran, it's different. They can't be held to the same standard as we hold, say, Canada. So we do not believe that they should be enriching. That should be, and we think that will do more to stop a nuclear arms race than the current Iran nuclear deal. Because other countries in the region look at Iran and they see them enriching and they say, why shouldn't I be allowed to enrich? You let them enrich, so you have to let me enrich. Those are the conversations that we hear in the region, because the deal allowed, it permitted Iran to enrich. It also, the Iran nuclear deal, essentially ended the prohibition on Iran's ballistic missile testing. That was part of the deal. That was a mistake. So there is a lot that we have to correct. And the first order of business is to deny the regime revenue, to start reshaping the political landscape, to understand that Iran's threats to peace and security are not limited to the nuclear program. They're much larger. It's Iran's ballistic missile inventory, its export of missiles, its regional aggression, and its arbitrary detention of dual national citizens. And so when you look at Secretary Pompeo's list of 12 demands, that's not a list that he created. It is driven by Iran's agenda. That is their foreign policy. Our list of 12 is the reverse image of Iran's foreign policy. What Iran wants to do, we want it not to do. And if you go through the list, I would challenge anybody to say which of the 12 things on that list they would like Iran to keep doing. Because I've heard people say this is an unrealistic list. Then please identify which terrorist organizations you want Iran to continue supplying lethal arms to. So that is sort of how we're taking a very comprehensive approach to Iran, and it's not limited to the nuclear program.
So let me ask one more somewhat provocative question, and then I'll turn to the audience, and this is for both of you. It seems to me endgame, whether by design or by default, can be one of three things: regime change, change of regime behavior, new set of negotiations, and to get a better deal with all of the aspects included in it. I suppose under change of regime behavior it's enough just to make it more difficult for them. So which of this is it? And then, many of us were disappointed that under the Obama administration, JCPOA was not bipartisan, that there wasn't at least an effort at something at least closer to something of a treaty, which I think then had its impact now. Again, the policy you're positioning, if you're listening to the Democratic candidates for president, is not bipartisan. So first of all, these goals, which is the end game, which would you want as the end game? And second of all, I'm hearing from the region, Shaikh Khalid, I'm hearing from the region concern that Middle East is becoming a partisan issue, and you could have the Democrats being Iran, and then the Republicans being the Arab states, and so I'd like to hear if you have concerns about that, but also, Brian, whether you do, in terms of you may just have the Iranians waiting out this administration.
You want me to go
Please.
first? Okay. The Islamic Republic, from its inception, from its beginning, has started from day one plotting against all the Arab countries. And me as a Bahraini, we saw it firsthand against our own country. So at that time, we did not call for regime change. And when they also intensified their efforts in 2011 to call for the overthrow of the government in Bahrain, we did not ask for regime change. Regime change is the matter relating to the Iranian people. They will choose what regime they want. There was an effort in 2009. We did not say a single word then in 2009, although the elections, we all know, was robbed from the people, and their candidates are still today under house arrest. But we didn't say anything because it's none of our business for regime change. What we are concerned with is the regime's behavior. We did see windows of openness with the regime when the late Hashemi Rafsanjani was in power. President Hashemi Rafsanjani then had a lot of agreements, especially with the the late King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia. They had many agreements that personal between them, and the matters that what direction it will take. Two wise leaders. Rafsanjani is not around anymore. He passed away. President Khatami was also a president who visited Bahrain, and His Majesty, our King Mohammed bin Isa, visited Iran during his term, and we saw it as a window within the Islamic Republic that it would take another direction, and we were kind of optimistic then. It was short-lived. Where is former President Khatami? Where are his people? Some of them in jail, some of them under house arrest, and some of them are completely silenced. So it's the behavior that we want to see. We've always said it, if the Islamic Republic will take one step forward, a real step, not something that they will say every day, because we get to a point that sometimes we don't believe what they offer. But if we find the truth and credibility in what they say, if they say one step, we'll take two. Because this is in our favor to have the region come to a fold of understanding, including Iran, and it's the Iranians' choice of having their own regime, what kind of they want, it's their matter. But if anything would happen to this regime, the Islamic Republic, I would blame the regime itself for causing it itself. The life in Tehran and other Iranian cities is very hard, very harsh. People are angry. People are even deserting the religion of Islam, our religion, and going back to the old religion of Iran, which is Zoroastrianism. It's their choice, but does it make us happy that we will be branded with something that they have discarded? This is not the case that we want to see between Iran and us. So regime change is their own matter. When we met in Warsaw, no one called for regime change. But behavior is where we are at today. Behavior should be better.
And the partisanship in the United States, does it concern you?
I think, yes, of course, because I lived in the United States for decades, between college and between being a diplomat here in Washington for almost 10 years. And then following all this close relationship with the country. And I'm almost, part of this society, and I understand it and follow it. But it's always been, the issue of threats to stability and security in the world is a bipartisan issue. So if there is anything happening that it makes issues like partisan issue, especially when it comes to Iran, Iran should not be a partisan issue. One would take a stand against it and one would take. Iran has actions that have ramifications on world security. So why did it become a partisan issue? Because of the two important parties do want world stability and security. I think the issue, if any party would want to take a higher ground on this matter, and instead of calling for going back to the deal, I think they should aim for a better deal. Because this deal that has been signed and the United States withdrew from it, I see it comatose. I don't see it coming back to life again. Nobody will want to believe in this deal again. And the only solution to have a deal is to have a much better deal that would prevent them from nuclear weapons, stop their weaponization program of their missiles, and stop their hegemonic and terrorist support, militia support, proxy support in the region. I think that deal will even bring us to that table when we discuss it, and I think it will be a much stronger deal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Brian.
Agree with every word he said. We are looking for a change in behavior. That is what we've been seeking all along. And we are, Iran would not like to change its behavior, would like to continue doing what it does. We are constraining its decision space through our sanctions and through our efforts at deterrence. We would like to get to a comprehensive deal. The infirmity of the current deal is that it only touches the nuclear program. So we would like to, it's all the areas that Shaikh Khalid identified. It's the nuclear program, the missile program, the regional aggression, and we also would like to see an end to the arbitrary detention of dual nationals, especially Americans. There are many languishing in Evin prison today who are innocent. And that practice of using human beings as pawns needs to end. We are hopeful about that. Iran does face a choice. They can either accept diplomatic off-ramps that have been offered for well over a year, or they can watch their economy deteriorate. They're at negative 6% economic growth right now. That number is going to continue to go up as this regime continues to make bad decisions. We will continue to intensify our sanctions, drive up the costs of Iran's very aggressive foreign policy. And look, the president has met with Kim Jong-un twice. He's not afraid of diplomacy. And he has already said that he will sit down with Rouhani, said that some time ago. I would mention that Iran keeps rejecting diplomacy. They have rejected it too many times. Prime Minister Abe made the first visit of a Japanese prime minister to the Islamic Republic in its history. And the supreme leader rejected his diplomacy and then also blew up a Japanese oil tanker while he was in country. You have had other leaders around the world who have made efforts to mediate, and they have failed because Iran keeps saying no. And the president is very comfortable with our foreign policy. We're very pleased with the success that we're having. And Iran faces a decision, and at some point, they have to decide where the cost benefit begins and ends for them.
Thank you, Brian. Questions? Take here, let me take these two first, and then we'll come back. Thank you. And if you could identify yourself, and we'll try to do quick back and forth, so short questions, short answers.
Sure. Simon Henderson, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Sheikh Khalid, nice to see you again, sir.
Nice to see you again.
Mentioned Qatar. You, sir, Mr. Hook, didn't mention Qatar. To what extent, Mr. Hook, is the Qatar rift with the other Gulf states an impediment to US-Iran policy?
So let's pick that up and get an answer. I think that's directed to you, Brian.
Yeah, on my last trip to the Gulf, I met with Qatar's finance minister. We had the emir was here recently, had very good bilateral meetings. Iran thrives on disunity. They like to surf those waters. We have said that we would like to see a unified GCC for a lot of different reasons. And so mostly national security reasons, but there are others. And we have done as best we can to try to bridge the differences. That has not happened yet. We continue to have very candid discussions with all members of the GCC, and those discussions will continue. But it is something which has many facets. Iran is one piece of it. But defer to Sheikh Khalid, I think you spoke about it earlier.
Well, clearly we don't see, as a member of the GCC, we don't see it as a GCC rift we have. We see an issue that Qatar is embroiled in, and that this GCC has responded all in different ways. Three countries, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, chose to close the door and boycott them and, send the right message that we cannot deal with you as long as you are, doing all the supporting of the terror and, change and in the region and spreading hate and undermining the interest of our countries. Kuwait also suffered in the past a lot from the Qatari policy, but Kuwait, in the benevolence of His Highness Emir Sheikh Sabah Ahmed al-Sabah, that he will wanted to make an effort of good offices and mediation, and that is welcomed, and we wish him all the success. Until today, until the last GCC summit, His Highness was trying, but to open the subject, and the King of Saudi Arabia was very clear. He said if Sheikh Tamim was here, it would have been different, we would have been able. So I think the Qataris should take the GCC seriously and give it a lot more importance than the Islamic Republic or any relations with countries like having the Turkish forces on their soil. We see it unnecessary, we see it uncalled for, and they should not be in there because we have our own agreement intra-GCC and with our allies in the United States, and there is no need for that. It's in the ball is in their court, and I think they can take the necessary step to come forward, and they will be definitely, open minds to listen to them within the fold of the GCC.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I'll go here and then to the woman 4 rows back after that, please.
Dave Lawler from Axios. Thanks so much. Brian, first for you, the Iranians have suggested that they would be willing to talk, but that the sanctions need to be loosened first. They said they won't negotiate with a boot on their neck, essentially. Are you ruling that out, pulling sanctions back first before talks, or is there a path forward there potentially? Sheikh Khalid, a question from my colleague Barak Ravid, who came up earlier in this discussion. He's wondering if you will be meeting with your Israeli counterpart at any of the upcoming forums that you will be overlapping.
That's right. This journalist wore 2 hats, an Axios hat and a Channel 13 hat.
He also writes
On the, I think it was Foreign Minister Zarif who may have said that. Iran seems to be having these proposals of we take concrete steps of ending our pressure, and then they agree to talk. That is not a very fair sort of proposal. And so Secretary Pompeo, I want to say a month ago, had said that he would talk, he would have talks with Iran without preconditions. They have not accepted that offer. They continue to reject diplomacy. And so for as long as they continue to reject it, our sanctions will intensify.
I can see Barack Ravid's influence coming all the way to here. With his question, he asked so many important questions when I saw him in Bahrain. But yes, we're here to attend the Religious Freedom Conference at the State Department by invitation of the United States. Many countries are there, including Israel, and I heard that the Foreign Minister of Israel will be there. We haven't fixed anything because we're concentrating on the conference itself. Maybe we'll be speaking the same language in the conference itself, but you know, us being in the same room, an encounter is possible. So, and we have no problem with encounters like these.
And Brian, is there anything more you can say on the sanctions front? You're suggesting a greater ratcheting up as there is no progress. What's the next step? What's the next step on the sanctions front?
Well, we don't preview our sanctions because that would be tipping off targets to our plans to freeze their assets and make it more difficult for them. We continue to look at the UN Security Council. There's some things that we are looking at there. In early May, I briefed the UN Security Council on our strategy and the kind of things that we're looking to do. Annex B in UN Resolution 2231 contains many opportunities there. We know that maritime security is a concern to a lot of countries. And so on Friday, I will be inviting a number of ambassadors to the State Department for a briefing to talk about some of our thinking on enhancing maritime security in the region. We've had a number of countries petition the UN Security Council making such a request. If we do eventually get a new initiative off the ground, it will need to be internationalized. As so much of the oil that moves through the strait flows to Asia and to Europe. The United States is on track to produce 13.4 million barrels of oil a day this year, and that number is going to increase. And so the world is very different today than when it was some decades ago. Maritime security, though, is an American interest, but it's also an international interest. Iran is the premier threat to freedom of navigation. In the Gulf, they have conducted these attacks off the coast of Fujairah and off the coast of Oman. They have bombed the Saudi east-west pipeline. They are doing everything they can to make it harder for oil to move freely in the region. And that's because Iran does not like having oil sanctions.
And its proxies in Yemen also doing the same thing in the Red Sea.
That's right, in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So Iran does not like oil sanctions. I get it. They're expressing their displeasure. That is a, look, I remember Kuwait supported Saddam Hussein in the Iraq War, and the Iranian regime repeatedly bombed oil platforms of Kuwait. This is what they do. This is what we're trying to change. We are trying to change the paradigm of Iran's foreign policy into something fundamentally different.
Thank you very much. Please.
Yes, hi, Joyce Karam with The National. Shaikh Khalid, I want to ask you, you said if the Islamic Republic takes a step forward, we will take two. What kind of steps are you looking for Iran to take at this point? You know, if you can express, you know, what is it in Yemen? Is it in the Gulf waters? Is it in Bahrain particularly? And to Mr. Hook, on maritime security, I mean, what concrete steps also are you seeking with, you know, your international partners? Will we see more European presence in the Gulf? And how has been the response so far?
I think the step that we would see it as a concrete step that would send the right message to us, to the governments, to the people of the region, is when they stop supporting terror and terror proxies. Hezbollah, Asayib, Hasht, Ashtar, Mukhtar, all of those different sub-brands or baby bells of the mother company. This is something that will make us.
I'm going to use that.
This is something
the baby
that,
bells is very good.
yeah, this is something that will make us feel comfortable, and we need to see to that we are dealing with somebody who's not, hitting kind of backstabbing us while they are talking to us. I think that's the most important step we want to see.
We already have over 30 nations. I'm going to answer a second question. We have over 30 nations that are part of the Combined Maritime Force, and that's operated, as His Excellency pointed out just a few minutes ago, that our Fifth Fleet in Manama is the basing for the Combined Maritime Force, which has various task forces, Task Force 150, Task Force 151, 152, and they each have different mission sets. One of them is maritime security, but that has been insufficient to deter Iran. So I think we need more countries in the region. We've talked about it as a Sentinel program. Secretary Pompeo and I were at CENTCOM a few weeks ago, meeting with General McKenzie and also General Clark from SOCOM, the two new leaders down there. And we were looking at various models that would, you need more assets in the theater, is the bottom line. You need to have more maritime assets, more aviation assets, more ISF. And that will make it harder for Iran to execute on its goals of disrupting freedom of commerce. And that ultimately is what we're talking about. We believe very much in freedom of navigation, in protecting international waters, and so we run freedom of navigation operations all over the world. And that includes in the Strait. We're going to continue doing that, but there is an opportunity, we think, to expand it. But it is not going to be the United States shouldering this by itself. We are looking for, I mean, this is a global issue.
Yes.
If you look at the May 12th tanker attacks, we did an inventory of all the countries that had direct interest in it. There were 17 countries that were, because you've got who owns the boat, the crew on the boat, who captains the boat, who insures the boat. It's a long list in the maritime world. So there were 17 countries that were implicated, who were stakeholders, who were adversely affected by this. And so as you see these maritime attacks, we're still tracking what's happened with the capture of this UAE tanker. Whether it's a capture, we're not sure what happened. We're still monitoring that. They tried to coerce a British vessel, but there was a British frigate that deterred that. And so the Islamic Republic is going to continue with this, and we think that there is an opportunity for countries to come together, and I'll be meeting with many of them on Friday to talk about the way forward.
Do either of you have any more information on this missing tanker?
We're in touch with the UAE. I've had regular discussions with them. It's something that we're looking at very closely to understand what has happened. There were a number of countries on that boat with crew from various countries. I want to say there are 4 or 5 countries that were represented there with crew members. It was a boat registered in the UAE. We have not heard anything from Iran yet. And so our Fifth Fleet in Bahrain is working, our officials diplomatically on the military side are in discussions with the UAE to try to get to the bottom of this.
Thank you. Please.
We don't have any information more than what Brian, you just explained, but it looks fishy a bit because the Iranians responded to a distress call that nobody else heard. So this is something, the ship suddenly, as we know, went silent and then surfaced that they have made a distress call and they were taken to be helped in an Iranian port. So I think this is something that we need to be cleared, and it's too early to say anything about this.
This would not be the first time that Iran attacks a boat and then tries to rescue its crew. Anyway.
Please. Here and there, yeah. Thank you.
They're over there on the other side.
Ilan Goldenberg with the Center for New American Security. Thanks for these comments and for having us here today. I had a couple of questions. One, Shaikh Khalid, I actually worked as part of Secretary Kerry's team on that effort you referenced in 2013 and 14 on the economic plans. And one of the things we found when we looked at a broad economic plan was that everything ultimately ran through Israel because Israel ultimately controls what goes into and out of the Palestinian territories and all the enablers. And I looked through the plan on the White House website and saw some of the comments at Bahrain. I did not see anything about any expectations of what Israel contributes to this plan. So I'd be interested to hear from you what the Arab world expects Israel to contribute to the peace and prosperity plan. And Brian, for you, if I could just ask, a lot of concern right now about potential miscalculation leading to conflict in the Gulf. Are we thinking about the United States ways to communicate? You know, it doesn't have to be diplomacy, but at least communicating our red lines, communicating quietly to Iran what our expectations are of what we will not tolerate and could lead us into a conflict.
I think regarding the plan for the Palestinian people, we see Israel as a natural partner for the success of that program, because they are there. They're one of the parties that, if any peace or understanding would be reached between them and the region, Israel.
If you look at the history, the 40-year history of the regime, when it is pressured, it doesn't respond within the left-right limits of international norms. It essentially demands that the world accept a certain level of terror, and if the world then doesn't like it, they then threaten more terror. When you play under house rules, the house always wins. We are trying to rewrite the rules of Iran's foreign policy. And as I said, there isn't an acceptable level of sort of this revolutionary expansionism to try to get all these regimes in the Middle East to adopt clerical and revolutionary oversight. That sort of sectarianism is the last thing the Middle East needs.
So we only have time for one more question, so I apologize for that. I've got about a dozen others out there, but please, sir.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Rabbi Abraham Cooper. I'm with the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles. I attended the conference in Bahrain. The weather was similar to today here in Washington. I actually just wanted to specifically report on and commend an amazing unplanned event, which was the first Jewish minyan at the synagogue in Bahrain since 1948. There were about 12 of us who came, diaspora Jews from as far away as Los Angeles, but also Israeli journalists who came for the first time on their own passports. And an event that went incredibly viral, both obviously in the Jewish world, but also among my Palestinian friends when I came back to Jerusalem. It was quite amazing, and that goes on the heels of what His Majesty has done with the religious declaration that he made 2 years ago, and the 24 interfaith leaders the Wiesenthal Center was able to host in Jerusalem. The psychological changes that are needed to bring about the situation we can have real peace have begun under the tutelage of Bahrain. It's quite remarkable. And for the Jewish world in the diaspora and for Israelis who are looking for a sense that things are changing, these are the kinds of dynamics that you can't quantify. But you know, that's why I think the expectations in the Jewish world is we expect and hope that Bahrain will continue to fight above its weight in this issue. Thank you.
That's great to hear.
Thank you for that, and you may want to comment or make a closing comment here. I want to ask one question to close that's really off these subjects, but not entirely. And that is, we are working a lot at the Atlantic Council on unlocking human potential in the region. If you placed the Middle East in any other part of the world, the GDP would be 3 times higher. I mean, if you just take that population and put it somewhere else. And so Amazon, you won the bake-off. So Amazon's coming to Bahrain. You've been a top 10 in the global startup list, which was new to me. I didn't know that. And so you've put a lot of efforts into vibrant tech ecosystem. One of the questions is, wouldn't this be a great place to work with Israel? But the real question here for me is and by the way, 18% of the companies are run by women compared to 16% in Silicon Valley. So I'm not saying that's a good number. I'm just saying Silicon Valley could do some work on that.
That's a good number.
It is a good number. So first of all, why can't we unlock this kind of thing across the region? Can one work on that somehow? Do you have aspirations to do that, maybe even with Israel? And then maybe you could also, if you want to comment or you want to make some closing remark. And I'm sorry, there are about a dozen other questions out there. I didn't get to them, but I'm really delighted that these gentlemen took as many questions as they did.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I think the potential is there, and as you mentioned, when you talk about countries working together, I think this is what we are aiming for. This is what we want to reach, and to see the ingenuity of people, be it from Israel or from Palestine or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, coming together. This is what drives us towards working for the future. And I will also have to mention that Saudi Arabia is now at the forefront of reform and moving forward and opening up, not only for in their economy, but also for its own society. They are taking important steps forward, and we're happy to have the ambassador of Saudi Arabia here, Princess Rima bint Bandar. She's a very capable, I've seen her before in Davos, and she's very capable ambassador for her country. So just wait for the Saudi women coming forward. Just wait for the Saudi potential coming forward, because for us in Bahrain and for the region, this is what the boon we want to see happening. And this will be a major driver for us coming together, the whole countries of the region.
Right.
No, other than I've heard similar things from Israeli friends, Rabbi, from what you described. And as I said, things are developing in ways that I think are escaping a lot of what the media is aware of. And we saw that in Bahrain. We certainly felt it firsthand. We think that there's so much more good work ahead. We have a very hopeful and positive vision for the Middle East. And we have deepened our alliances in the region diplomatically and on security and on economics. And that is going to continue. It's not an accident that the president's first trip overseas was to the Middle East. And he went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Israel, and then he met with the Pope. And so it's a region that we're very invested in. We care very much about our friends succeeding. We want our friends to succeed in the region. We don't want them to be under regular assault by a regime. I get the regime change question a lot. It is the Iranian regime, more than any other regime, that wants regime change. They don't want it for themselves, but they certainly want it for a lot of countries in the region. And we are trying to change that calculus for them. We're very happy with the progress we've made over the last couple of years.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to try to make any closing comments. I do want to thank Sheikh Abdullah and his staff. We turned this around very quickly, and it's a really remarkable team you have. I want to thank Will Wexler and the team he leads, and Catherine Wolf for the amazing work that she did. But most of all, I want to thank Shaikh Khalid and Brian Hook for taking so much time with us.
Thank you. Thanks.